Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to this afternoon's BCP planning meeting. I'm Councillor Kelsey, and it's my job to chair the meeting this afternoon. I will pass straight over to Democratic Services Officer this afternoon, that is Joseph Tyler, and he will read out the housekeeping notice regarding how this meeting will be managed. Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Chairman. So please note that this meeting of the Planning Committee is being recorded by the Council for live and subsequent broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced already. Please mute your microphone when you are not talking. After the committee has heard from the planning officer and received written statements from the public and ward councillors, the chairman will ask committee members who wish to speak to do so by typing RTS, request to speak, in the instant message conversation panel on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Please note this panel is visible to all parties. Please do not use this panel for any other purpose than requesting to speak. The chairman will ask officers to respond or clarify as required. And if at any point you would like to speak again, please again type RTS. Please note that when the vote is taken, the chairman will read out the name of each committee member in turn, and they will need to indicate whether they are voting for, against, or abstaining from the vote altogether. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. I will now ask each person who is attending this meeting this afternoon to state their name and their role, starting with Councillor Simon McCormack.
Councillor Simon McCormack, Vice Chairman Planning and Ward Councillor for Burton and Grange.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Barron.
Councillor Steve Barron, Ward Councillor for Parkstone.
Councillor Steve Bartlett.
Good afternoon, Councillor Steve Bartlett, Councillor for Redhill and Northbourne Ward.
Councillor Simon Bull.
Simon Bull, Councillor for Winton East Ward.
Councillor Malcolm Davies.
Councillor for East Southbourne and Tupton.
Councillor Norman Decent.
Councillor Norman Decent, Ward Councillor for Kinson.
Councillor Beverley Dunlop.
Councillor Beverley Dunlop, Ward Councillor for Moordown, and I'm substituting for Councillor Peter Hall today.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Councillor Paul Hilliard.
Paul Hilliard, Ward Councillor for Muddyford, Stampit and West Highcliffe.
Councillor Marion Lepodovin.
Marion Lepedvin, Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands.
Councillor Bob Lawton.
Very good. Councillor Bob Lawton, Councillor for West Southbourne.
Councillor Tony O'Neill.
Councillor Tony O'Neill, Councillor for Pen Hill.
Councillor Anne Stribley.
Anne Stribley, Parkston Ward Councillor.
Councillor Tony Trent. Councillor Trent, are you with us? Do we have any information that Councillor Trent is with us, Jill?
Chair, I think he's just dropped off the call. We will endeavour to invite him back into the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Simon Gould.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Simon Gould, Development Management Manager.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Doug Evans, Development Management Team Leader.
Mr. Raven.
Thank you, Chairman. Charles Raven, Senior Planning Officer.
Tanya Coulter.
Thank you, Chairman. Tanya Coulter, Senior Solicitor, Legal Services.
And we have Joe Tyler. As we know, Joe is a Democratic officer this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Chair.
So we will move on to the agenda items for this afternoon's meeting. Firstly, may I ask Joe if we have any apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have received apologies from Councillor Toby Johnson, who, if able, may join the meeting at a later stage. And as we have already heard, we have also received apologies from Councillor Peter Hall, taking us to item 2, substitutions, where Councillor Beverley Dunlop has joined us as substitute for Councillor Peter Hall. I'll now pass back to you for item 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest from any members regarding this afternoon's meeting, please? I have no notices in the board, so I will take that as none. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. Can I ask if the committee agrees to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of August 2020 as an accurate record?
Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you for that, everybody.
Agreed.
And item 5, public issues. I will explain that the presentation of each application, I will defer to the democratic officer to read out any written statements before we hear from any ward councillors who wish to speak. And we will move on to the schedule of planning applications now. The first being 5A, Murli Court Touring Park, Wimborne. And I will ask Mr. Evans if he would prepare the presentation for the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Presumably you can confirm that the image is now before you.
I can, Mr. Evans. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman, proposed use of land at Murli Court Touring Park, a holiday site, for the stationing of 99 static caravans, permanent caravans for permanent residential occupation. What I'd like to draw members' attention to first is the addendum sheet that was circulated yesterday. The report before you indicates that Natural England are maintaining an objection to the proposals. I can advise you, as per the addendum sheet, that that objection has now been withdrawn. Natural England have no objection to proposals. The prospect or the potential impact of the proposed use on the Dorset Heathlands and on Poole Harbour having now been potentially addressed. There are methods set out in the Dorset Heathland Planning Framework SPD and in the Poole Harbour Recreation SPD that allows the mitigation to be calculated, and that has been done, and therefore the strategic access management and monitoring requirements, in addition to the Heathland Infrastructure Project requirements set out in those SPDs, can now be addressed to the satisfaction of Natural England and the Council's own officers by securing the contributions as set out in your report through the mechanism of Section 106 agreement. So there is no outstanding objection from Natural England. Let me put the application site in context. The extreme northwest corner, I think it's safe to say, of the borough, adjacent to the Willets-on roundabout on the A31, which is perhaps the landmark nearest, just south of the boundary and just south of Wimborne. Let me put that into a little bit, more context. The A31, the Willets-on Arms roundabout, the A31, and at the top end of Gravel Hill as it leaves the borough boundary being up by the River Stour. While I've got that image in front of you, let me just take you to perhaps one of the pertinent or key considerations, the green belt. The boundary of the green belt is the A31 predominantly in this part of the image in front of you. So north of the A31, green belt, south of the A31, not green belt. There is a hole in the green belt, as it were, that covers the Murli Ways, Oakley Hill residential area there, but wrapping around that is the green belt. So all of this area west of the A349 Gravel Hill is within the green belt. So the application site is within the green belt. Murli House Holiday Park, Murli Court Holiday Park, which is the application site, all within the green belt. And while I've got that in front of you, let me just well, no, actually I'll come back to that. So the application site is within the green belt. Going a little bit closer to put a little bit more detail to that context, Murli House, Grade 2 listed building. Its curtilage and the walled garden, which is in itself a scheduled historic park and garden, with its suite of buildings and enclose it. The Murli House Holiday Park, static caravans existing. The Murli Court Holiday Park comprises a mixture of uses at the moment in terms of the nature of the accommodation provided. So an existing area of lodges, more of that in a moment, within the lower woodland area to the eastern side of the site, where levels change down to the Cobham Sports Club, which is the immediate neighbour to the east. An area historically was used for caravan storage. I'll come back to that in a moment. If we want to call it the amenities area of the holiday park in terms of a shop and play facilities, scattered around the access ways around the site are the utility buildings providing toilet facilities, washing facilities, and currently the western triangle of the application site has lodges. Let me move to more detail on that. So, as it stands at the moment, 12 lodges permitted back in 2010, holiday conditions attached to them in terms of how they're occupied and used. They're set within the woodland. Let me just go back to that. Within that woodland area at the eastern side of the site, which forms a pretty strong visual barrier between the application site and the land beyond. 4 lodges permitted in 2015 within that area that was on the aerial photograph being used for storage of touring caravans. That permission established a principle on appeal about the relationship of development on this site to the adjacent heritage asset. An inspector opined that the storage of caravans there, and it subsequently followed the siting of lodges there, did not have an impact on the adjacent heritage asset. Whilst the report is silent on the issue of impact on the heritage asset, I can advise the committee that there is no identified impact on the adjacent heritage asset as represented by the scheduled garden and the adjacent listed building. That triangular area that I alluded to in the bottom southwest corner of the holiday park coincided with phase 1 of a permission for 83 lodges, which would have filled the rest of the site, excluding the 2 areas, the 12 lodges and 4 lodges. So the rest of the site was permitted to have, in 2015, 83 lodges that would have been permanently on the site. Those lodges were subject to conditions that required them, most particularly, to only be occupied 11 months of the year. Of course, they would have been there. They would still be there 12 months of the year. They merely wouldn't be lived in for 1 month during the winter, January to February. That permission established the capacity of the site to accommodate the number of lodges proposed in terms of the layout, access, car parking, ancillary structures associated with them in terms of decking to facilitate access and private amenity space within the wider communal amenity space. It prescribed limits to the size of those buildings. What members might not appreciate is the buildings shown on that on that drawing fall slightly short of, well, a little bit short of the maximum size of these kind of caravans, lodges, that would be permitted under the Caravans Act. So rather than permit an open-ended size to the lodges, it was prescribed by that consent that they shouldn't exceed the size shown in the approved drawings attached to that consent. It also dealt with such issues as refuse collection, refuse storage, and in prescribing a phased approach to it, it of course meant that development of the site, the laying out the lodges, proceeded in an orderly manner, and it left the rest of the site available for its then existing use as a touring caravan and camping site as that development proceeded. I think it is pertinent to your consideration of this application that of the 83 lodges permitted in 2015, only that corner, those 19 lodges, have proceeded. The rest of the site is still in use as a touring caravan and camping site. It's still being publicised by the owners as a touring, camping and caravan site, as well as a tourist site in terms of renting the lodges as tourist accommodation. So this was the approved layout in 2015. Again, just to come back to that point, that triangular corner of the site, phase 1, which is now nearing full occupation. but the remainders of the site not done, the lodges have not been sited there yet, and that's a key word, sited. You're not permitting buildings, you're permitting the siting and the use of land by, if you were to permit this consent. The consent given in 2015 allowed the siting of caravans on land, so it's the use of land rather than the erection of buildings, and that is fundamental to your consideration of the application. So, as previously approved, as now proposed, to all intents and purposes, the central part of the site is as per the 83 holiday lodges previously permitted. The principal difference is the extent of the consent has now grown to include and incorporate the existing lodges on the site and the 4 lodges permitted in the former caravan storage area. So, in looking at the proposal before you today, I'd suggest that it's, or I would advise that it's necessary to consider the incremental impacts of that scheme relative to the previously permitted and implemented scheme. It is about the additional use of the site, the use for that extra 1 month of the year. Of course, the caravans would not be moved during that year. So in terms of visual, physical impact on the openness of the green belt, there is no difference between the two. The use is different. The levels of activity associated with them might be different at different times of the year, but you should be addressing the incremental changes, the incremental impact arising over and above the impacts that already would exist once the existing extent consent was developed out across the 4 phases. So the key impact there is essentially that 1 extra month of occupation. As I said, the report is silent on the impact on the adjacent heritage asset, but there is no harm to the adjacent heritage asset, the listed building and scheduled garden to the west. Impact on tourism. The site is continuing to operate as a touring caravan and camping site on those phases of the development that haven't yet been built out, as you would perhaps expect. And I think there is a clue in the fact that after 5 years, only a small part of the site has been brought forward because of the constraints on it. So there's clearly no suppressed demand for this site as a tourism asset. There are other facilities in the borough, there are other facilities outside the borough, and inspectors have opined in the past about the loss of tourism facilities to the transition from temporary use or holiday use to more permanent occupation of caravans, and I'd suggest that there is very little impact in that transition. So, very little impact in terms of the impact on the tourism offer. No additional highway issues have been identified arising from the proposed change. Clearly, a lot of the issues about the access and let's just go back to that first slide. The principal access being a long road directly off the Willets Homes. It's one of the branches off the Willets Homes roundabout. It's a road without footpaths for most of its way, but of course all of these issues were addressed at the time that the permission was given in 2015 for the units for holiday use. So no additional impact has been identified over and above issues that were addressed at that point and not found to be sufficiently harmful to be set against the benefits of the scheme. There is no additional tangible impact on the character and openness of the green belt arising from this development. The use of the land would have similar impacts and would have similar characteristics and similar character to the previously approved scheme, and therefore we keep coming back to that point about seeking to identify any tangible, real differences arising from the incremental changes that this represents relative to the previously approved scheme. So, with 2 schemes before you, of 2 schemes to be compared there, the previously approved 83, the already existing consents for lodges, this now wrapping it into a single consent for all of those to be used as residential or domestic for 12 months of the year rather than the existing 11 months of the year. I would suggest that those incremental changes do not amount to any material harm in respect of any of the material considerations that you should bring to bear on this, and without any tangible harm being identified in any of those respects. The recommendation before you today is to approve the scheme subject to the completion of the necessary Section 106 agreement to secure the Heathland and Harbour mitigation measures necessary. Chairman, the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I will now ask Mr. Tyler to read out the written statements that have been received relating to this application before I come to councillors and ward councillors. Mr. Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So for this application, we have received 2 statements in objection and 1 in support. The first statement of objection was received from a Ms. Marion Pope, who is a local resident, and her statement is as follows. I was one of many who objected to the change of use of this site for holiday lodge caravans in place of touring caravans in 2015, referring to application 14-01672/C. Touring caravans maintained the open aspect of this greenbelt site, which provided, in addition to excellent holiday facilities, a stopover for those taking a ferry from Poole to Europe. I believe Poole Planning Committee was mistaken in overturning the case officer's recommendation to refuse it. This satellite image shows all the holiday lodge sites which surround Grade 2 listed Murli House. There would appear to be an oversupply, which is perhaps why only a proportion of permitted lodges on this site, bottom left-hand corner, have been sold in the last 5 years. If the council allows permanent occupation here, it will set an unfortunate precedent and other sites will soon follow. The result would be a shanty town on the edge of Wimborne. Ken Park has submitted a planning, design and access statement dated September 2017, which has little relevance to the present policies of either the National Planning Policy Framework or the Poole Local Plan 2018. In a letter dated 23rd of August 2019, Ken Park justifies this application on the ground that the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. That is not true. He further argues that the council is failing to meet its housing targets because of the time taken to determine planning applications 19-00237/P and 19-00955/P. These applications are for major urban extensions of 1,295 houses on sites which, prior to 2018, were also within the SE Dorset Green Belt. As such, the developers and the council are having to meet stringent requirements for transport mitigation, pupil placement and medical services, requirements which, for some reason, do not apply to this development. There is no shortage of greenbelt sites being offered for housing development through the local plan process. If the council was prepared to sacrifice the greenbelt for houses, which it is not, a development of static lodges for permanent occupation should not be among its preferred options. End of statement. Chairman, the second statement of objection has been received from a Mr. Philip Hammock, who, as well as being a local resident, is also the owner of Murli House Holiday Park. And his statement is as follows. To begin, we do not necessarily disagree with the principle of development, but do have reservations. Whilst there is no walkway or footpath along Murli House Lane, this has become an increasingly dangerous road to walk along. Speed signs and ramps were installed by us years ago to try and slow traffic up and down this lane with only limited success. It is extremely dangerous for people walking up and down this lane. This also goes for cyclists using the lane, as it only goes out onto the A31 main trunk through the county. They only have access to a footpath once down at the roundabout. The nearest cycle route is not actually close to this development from Murli House Lane. The lane does not cater well for pedestrians. Most people that wish to go to the main road by foot use the path that runs through the bottom of Murli Court, out through Cobham Sports and social grounds onto Murli Park Road. This pathway has been used for over 70 years by people living up Murli House Lane or staying on Murli House Holiday Park. It was used as a cut-through for the dustmen and lorries back in the 1970s before the bypass was opened. Murli Court insists that this is not a right-of-way, but evidence can be provided to dispute this. If planning were passed for this change, then I think that there must be a condition added that a proper right-of-way and access be added, as it would then provide a safe way for people to get down to Oakley Hill and Gravel Hill, enabling people to get to bus stops, walks down the Castlemaine Trail and beyond. In conclusion, whilst I am not against this application, access up the lane to this holiday park would need to be greatly improved. The road widening and the footpath could be installed on Murli Court's own boundary, and the road resurfaced by them at the same time as a stipulation to this planning application. Another point is that the effect of less accommodation for Poole in connection with tourism, holiday makers, should be considered. We have already lost the touring side of this business, which means less spaces for holiday makers to come and enjoy what the Poole area and beyond can offer. I hope these points are taken on board by the Planning Committee. That's the end of the statement from Mr. Philip Hammack. And we finally have one statement in support from Ken Park, who are the planning agents representing the applicant. And his statement is as follows. Planning permission has already been granted for the siting of 99 caravan lodges on the site, subject to a condition prohibiting occupation during the period of 7th of January to 7th of February. The application before you simply seeks to remove that condition with no physical development or alterations to the site being proposed. The matters at issue resolve around the consequences, if any, of removing that restriction, and indeed whether or not that restriction is effective and can reasonably be retained in any event. The site is previously developed land within the Greenbelt. Sorry, there's a loud vehicle going past, I'll just pause. The site is previously developed land within the Greenbelt, and the proposed removal of the condition will have no impact on the Greenbelt, no impact on character, amenity, or highway safety. The lodges can currently be occupied by a single user for 11 months of the year. A person could live permanently in the lodge for most of the year. The lodges are sold or leased to private individuals who use them as holiday homes, either for their own purpose or leased to others when not in the use as a source of income. The condition has no effect on the overall manner of occupation as such, by whom, or by the intensity of that occupation, other than prohibiting occupation in January. The removal of that condition, therefore permitting 12 months of occupation, will not alter that situation, but simply permit additional occupation over a longer period. The consequences of this are that the site will not be dormant in January, early February, and thus will be economic benefit to the area. The lodges will continue to be sold on the open market in the same manner as they are currently sold. The officer's report refers to the change as incremental. The applicants consider the impact of the incremental change to be negligible, as no harm that could be substantiated is identified. Indeed, the change will deliver economic and social benefits as set out in the officer's report. The tourism offer of the site is limited in the context of the wider Poole and BCP area, and the site is on the periphery in any event. The applicants own a number of much larger and better facilitated sites in the nearby vicinity, and as a consequence of the economy of scale, so could still provide tourism accommodation to persons who wish to visit this area. The overall impact on tourism in the area will therefore be negligible. However, as mentioned, the lodges will be sold in the same manner as they currently are. The 12 months occupancy will bring economic benefit when compared to 11 months occupancy. There is no reason not to permit the removal of the condition, and the applicants respectfully request that you confirm the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. End of statement from Ken Park. Chair, I will pass back to you to introduce the ward councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyler. So we do have ward councillors with us this afternoon, the first being Councillor David Brown. Councillor Brown, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As a ward councillor for the Bearwood and Murli ward for over 13 years now, I'm very familiar with this site and with the controversial planning history of the site. I was in attendance at the Borough of Poole Planning Committee on the 28th of May 2015, at which the application for the change of use to site holiday lodge caravans in place of touring caravans was considered by what was then the new recently elected Planning Committee at its first committee meeting following the 2015 elections. Many of those committee members had campaigned during those elections against inappropriate development on the Green Belt. The planning officer at the time had considered the application in detail and had actually recommended that it be refused, as it was her view that it was harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt and contrary to planning policy. I sat on that planning committee and I voted against that planning application in 2015. In spite of the planning officer's recommendation to refuse, the planning committee was split, 4 votes in favour and 4 against for its decision, and that application was only passed on the chairman's casting vote, and that was the very first planning application at the very first planning committee that newly elected member as chairman had ever sat on. You can see how finely balanced and contentious that decision was. That decision, which in my mind was a bad decision, places this current committee in a difficult position. I spoke against this plan in 2015, and 5 years later I still believe that this should not be permitted. It is not a suitable or sustainable location for permanent residential accommodation for many reasons highlighted in the report. These include the highway access from the very busy Murli roundabout on the main A31 trunk road. It's not located within a sustainable transport corridor. There is no adequate proper pedestrian access to the site. How many members on this committee are not able to access their homes on foot on a proper pavement without having to walk in a road like these residents would have to? The impact on the residential development on the local services in the Murli area, especially the local first school and the doctor's surgery, and the inadequate plans as detailed in the report for waste collection, as this is not a suitable layout for individual bin collection and would require significant numbers of unsightly communal bins. This plan will be harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt and will be harmful to the local tourism offer due to the loss of tourist accommodation, contrary to planning policy PP23. If this was a new application for the construction of 99 residential homes in the Greenbelt, it would not be entertained, as it is clearly against planning policy. The fact that this proposal has arrived here by a convoluted route and with a contentious planning history should not alter the fact that it is inappropriate, and the planning committee today should refuse permission for this change of use.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Richard Burton, we have a written statement. Mr. Tyler, will you read that, please?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. So, Councillor Burton, also Ward Councillor, has written the following statement. As a Ward Councillor for Bearwood and Murli, I have been contacted by several residents who feel strongly that this planning application should be rejected, so I am objecting to this application on their behalf. Murli Court Holiday Park is in Greenbelt. The decision of the Planning Committee to allow the erection of the holiday lodges in the Greenbelt was against the initial recommendations of the pool planning officer and was, in my opinion, a poor decision. If the original application had not been brought before the pool planning committee at that time, permission would have not been granted. The original committee's decision has put our officers in a difficult position and went against the former Poole Borough Council's planning policy. Although the application is promoted as only allowing holiday accommodation to be used for 12 months of the year, rather than just over 10 months at present, in reality it could well mean that the lodges will become permanent residencies. It will be without any consideration to local school placement planning or to the GP practice planning. They will also have not provided any community infrastructure levy payments. As far as I can see, the only positive aspect of allowing holiday lodges at this site was to create revenue from tourism. This is a major holiday site within BCP and is one of the closest to the centre of Poole. The benefits from tourism will actually be lost if the conversion to permanent residency is allowed. The only permitted access to this site is via the A31 roundabout. The access road to Murli Court Holiday Park has no pedestrian footway. There is very poor pedestrian provision to this entrance and no provision for cycling. If you leave this site on foot, you can only travel east along a very narrow footpath, which is only passable by a single person along much of its route. This footpath ends at the side of the A349 on a blind corner with no provision for safe crossing. There are no associated pedestrian crossing points over any of the A roads. At present, there is a permissive path, limited to access by foot, through the grounds of Cobham Social Club towards Murli, but this provision could be withdrawn at any time. Leaving this site by cycle is directly onto a very busy roundabout on the A31, the main South Coast trunk road. Nothing has been put in place to promote either walking or cycling as a safe mode of transport. The site is not within a sustainable transport corridor. The exit from Murli Court Holiday Park onto the A31 roundabout is also very difficult for cars. The busy A31T and A349 both have priority at this roundabout, so leaving the site is problematic. As a touring holiday park, the traffic tends to be leaving the site at off-peak times. With residential use, there is the prospect of much greater numbers of vehicles attempting to leave the site at peak times. This will add to delays at an already busy junction and create a greater likelihood of collisions at the junction. This junction lies just outside the BCP area. The Murli Court Holiday Park site has been considered within the Poole local plan and rejected as a site for housing, even though other sites within the Greenbelt were accepted. These other sites are currently in the process of coming before the BCP Planning Committee and, if accepted, will add a further 650 properties within 600 metres of the entrance to Murli Court Holiday Park. Allowing permanent residence on this site will permanently damage the openness of the Greenbelt. This is against government policy. If this application is passed by the Planning Committee, the residents of Bearwood and Murli and the whole of BCP will perceive it as yet another residential development on Greenbelt land with no associated infrastructure provision. Thank you. That is the end of Councillor Richard Burton's statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Members, just before I come back to Mr. Evans to sum up on what he's heard from the applicants, I'll just remind everyone that we are not here this afternoon to discuss what was and what was not approved back in 2015. Those were previous decisions. They have been made. We are purely here this afternoon to debate and make a decision on the application in front of us today. Mr. Evans, is there anything you would like to come back on what you've heard from the deputations?
Yes, please, Chairman, just a couple of things. And just to reiterate the point also that you've just made, that as with Councillor Brown, I also attended that meeting, and yes, it was finally a balanced judgment that was made. However, planning decisions don't attribute shades of acceptability to development. They're binary, they approve or they refuse. The development was approved, and therefore the nature of the vote or the arguments that went before that fall away once that decision is given. There is an extant planning permission that has been implemented, and that's the starting point for moving forward from that point. A number of points made. One administrative point: we're not asking you, or you're not being asked to consider an application to remove a condition. It's expressly not a variation of the previous consent. This is a separate consent, a separate application for the use of the land for the use proposed. So it's not merely seeking to vary the condition, it's a standalone consent. That may seem a trivial point, but it is administratively important to us in terms of the going forward with any decision that you might make. 5-year land supply has been mentioned. Poole has a 5-year land supply because of the Poole local plan. It's slightly different in that respect from considering applications in the Bournemouth and Christchurch parts of the borough. The Poole local plan demonstrates a 5.2-year land supply, and also the Poole local plan seeks to encourage a wide range within that of house types, and clearly the types of lodge accommodation that's being proposed does fit into that spectrum of types of accommodation that would be envisaged across all types of housing as set out in the plan. Paths and rights of way. It's not for this committee or for anyone else through this process to prescribe a right of way across third-party land. There may or may not be, by reason of use, a right of way across any adjoining third-party land, but that's a matter for to be addressed under other processes, and is not something you should seek to impose. Clearly, the question of footpaths and the absence of footpaths on the access road is no different to the situation that was considered in respect of the same number of lodges on the previous consent. I would suggest that there will be some increase in traffic during the period when it would otherwise have been quieter. Bear in mind that it wasn't the current consent doesn't prohibit going to the lodges. It prohibits occupying them during that period. So people attending for maintenance purposes or day trips or whatever it might be, it just prescribes that they shouldn't be occupied during that period. Would there be more traffic on the junction with the A31? There may be a different pattern of access. There'd be the same number of units. I'd suggest whichever way you look at that, the volume of traffic generated by this number of units, and bear in mind we're talking about incremental changes attributed to the perhaps different way in which they would be occupied. I've suggested any increase in numbers of trips or the timing of trips associated with the proposal before you today relative to the volume of traffic on the A31 would be, I wouldn't often use the word trivial, but I'd suggest that the number of trips generated over and above the extant consent on the A31 would be trivial relative to the total number of vehicle movements on the A31 on any day. The point about could they become permanent accommodation, Councillor Burton made, yes, that is implicit in the application. They could be occupied as permanent accommodation. Equally, they could continue to be occupied as second homes or homes that people choose to rent out as holiday accommodation and take an income from. But yes, the opportunity is there, as it is with any residential use. They could be occupied permanently, and yes, the consequences that he attributed to that may arise, but of course they could equally arise from their occupation during 11 months of the year, as is already permitted by the extant consent. Chairman, that's I think all I wish to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I will now come to board members to decide on this application. First of all, Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Is the other ward member not present on the committee? In which case I'll be happy to speak on this one. I have to say I am totally shocked by the officer's presentation and recommendation on this site. I'm not a ward councillor, but I lived in the area less than a mile away from the site for 30 years, and it is Greenbelt. I was present, I lived there when it was made Greenbelt, when the A31 was finally put through. And with the Dorset structure plan of the late 70s, early 80s, the site was or sites off the A31 were identified as appropriate for temporary stopping places for caravans, you know, on the east-west route and so on. I don't see any reason whatsoever to change the current proposal. It to change the current situation. It drives a horse and cart through our green belt policies. Once you establish the permanent occupation of such lodges, they could well become some people's permanent home, with all the difficulties that could imply in that perhaps they would be less affluent people living in small wooden lodges. And when you have a wooden lodge, when you actually have a wall, we had a debate about this some years ago, and a legal point, when there was meant to be a garden wall built, and it turned out to be a fence. And the legal officer pointed out that a wall can be made of anything, be it brick, stone, wood, or whatever, so a fence can be counted as a wall. So once you have lodges there, there would be no reason for them not to be turned into permanent houses. What is the difference? I have another point to make. In the vicinity of this site, a 1930s, just over 2-bedroomed tatty bungalow sitting in over 10 acres was refused permission to turn it into a house and add a small extension, because that was more than a 10% increase in its build. And yet we're talking here about permanent residential on the site. I agree, over the years there has been incremental planning, that the semi-permanent or the large caravans stood there. We then had officers arguing, well, what was the difference with a lodge? You know, the structure was just sitting there for the whole year, so what was the difference? and the changes on the site have been incremental. And yes, I too was present at the 2015 planning application, and I was very, very shocked at that decision too. We hear the comments from Mr. Evans about, well, what is harmful against the benefits of the scheme? And that was the words he used. To me, there are no benefits except to the owners of the site, who themselves will achieve a great economic benefit, but it won't do any benefit to the local community, to the Bearwood area, and I doubt it will do any significant additional benefit to Wimborne or Oakley Strait, which are the nearest shopping centres. However, I can see that it would do tangible harm. We have a similar site in Poole. We have Rockley Caravan Touring Park, where most of the sites are very large, semi-permanent. They're certainly not, you can't tuck them behind a car and tow them off. In effect, lodges, they're probably made of metal and plastic rather than wood, but they are the same thing. And that is regulated by its 11-month-a-year occupation. It closes down for a month. Otherwise, in effect, you would have a village of several hundred people, both tucked at the end of Rockley Park, and in effect, that's what would happen here. You would end up having a village of 300 or 400 people. I shouldn't think many people would occupy singly, but a few might, with no facilities. I'm absolutely with the ward councillors on this one, and the local resident who object, Marion Pope, she was in effect a ward councillor for the area for a great number of years, and she was an absolute stalwart, as were the other ward councillors, for the defence of the Green Belt. So obviously we've got to hear what others say, but I am very happy to propose refusal of this application because of its impact on the Green Belt, and that it is not suitable for permanent occupation of the site. It should remain a touring and holiday area, which we need in the area. We don't need substandard, rather cramped accommodation, permanent accommodation by the back door. And I am amazed at the presentation on this one. I cannot see the logic behind it. I think there's a lot of pressure somewhere. But Chairman, you guess I don't like the application.
It did cross my mind, Councillor Stribley. I must ask in future when we're all talking if we can stick to the application site that we are actually talking about. It does make life a lot easier rather than referring to other sites about what they do and what they don't do, because they have no consequence on what we're deciding today.
Well, it is just a direct example. Chair.
I know where you're coming from, Councillor Stribley, but we must keep to this particular application site.
I'll be more mindful in future.
You wish to second?
Yes, Chair. Before I come on, I'd just like to say that I'm in complete agreement with the very eloquent statements of Councillor David Brown and Richard Burton, and there's not really much more I can add to those very comprehensive list of objections, which I agree with entirely, and also the move by my colleague Councillor Stribley. I agree entirely with her sentiments on this application. And I too am a little surprised that this has come forward as a recommendation from officers. I'm particularly concerned about the highway issues, which don't seem to have got any real objection from the highways team, because I too am very concerned about the pedestrian safety going down that very long, narrow and poor conditioned lane. I also have to say that I would be concerned about the loss of the touring park to the tourism industry, because the park is a very attractive park. It's obviously well maintained and well managed, and it's very busy. And the visits that I've made there, I could see that it's a very popular tourism destination. And so therefore I've got no hesitation in supporting the move made by Councillor Stribley, and I'm very happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. I obviously heard the report, and as the officer said, and I think it's section 49 sums up the situation pretty well, is that people are using the site 11 months of the year. So whether there's road issues or whatever, the fact is we are where we are. People are using it. It's a green belt. People are using it for 11 months. So to make it from 11 months to 12 months, looking at section 45 of the balance, I'm in favour of the change. I don't think we're in a position to for the sake of a month. I think it would be difficult for us to make any other decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hilliard. Councillor De Podder then.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of what I want to say has already been said, and I fully endorse and support what has been said by the ward councillors and Councillor Stribley, and Councillor Bartlett for that matter. It seems to me this application, or the report particularly, is full of hypotheticals. We're told that the current lodges that are only available for occupation for 11 months of the year could be lived in continuously by the same people for those 11 months, but we have no indication whether that happens or not. Likewise, if the application was granted, the permanent fixtures could be still used for holidays, but again we have no means of knowing. But to me, the fact that this is being sold on the erroneous view that we are short of a 5-year land supply, which of course we're not in Poole, is that they are being sold to us, sold in inverted commas, as additional permanent housing. And then that, of course, throws up all the additional things like medical facilities, possibly school facilities, and travel to work. If people are here on holiday, the chances are they take their car off to explore the county, to go down to the coast. If people are here living permanently and going to work, we hope that they will be using public transport, cycling maybe, and less car use. This site, with the current setup, with the road facilities, or rather lack of, does not encourage that. So that is, to me, is also a major issue. It seems to me that the people who will benefit from the scheme are the owners of the site, who will no doubt make more money, quite a bit more money, on selling lodges that are for permanent occupation rather than ones that can only be used for 11 months of the year. I'm not sure that there's much benefit to BCP or to local people. One thing that hasn't been touched on, and seems to be confusion, the permission from 5 years ago was for lodges, and incidentally I was also on that committee. There seemed to be an awful lot of us. This is talking about permanent static caravans. Are we talking about the same thing? There's no mention of the dimensions of the caravans. Will they be limited to the size of the permission for the lodges from 5 years ago, or will that have to come back to committee were we to grant this application? But I hope it is not granted, because I think it is not to the benefit of BCP, to local residents, or probably anyone who would buy these caravans or lodges or whatever they are.
Thank you, Councillor Lepodovin. Mr. Evans, would you like to come back on anything so far?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things. I'm not unsympathetic to some of the comments that are being made. However, this is not an opportunity to rerun the decision that was made 5 years ago. Any attempts to put the genie back in the bottle, I would suggest, would be unfounded and potentially exposing the council to challenge through the appeal process, because this is not a rerun of that. We have moved on from that. Many of the points that I'm hearing were points that were raised and debated 5 years ago. Concerns about traffic, concerns about impact on the green belt, concerns about loss of the touring part of the site. Though that decision was taken 5 years ago, and we've moved on by the granting of that consent to a different starting point. We cannot go back to and start this journey from where we were 5 years ago. We have to move forward from the fact that there is an extant consent for all of those lodges permanently on that site. The touring part of the site has effectively been set aside. It continues until such time as the lodges are there, but that decision has already been taken that the touring site is lost. The traffic side of things, again, is being considered, and you have to deal with the incremental aspect of it. You're not looking at the 99 lodges, you're looking at the incremental change of them being occupied for that extra month in a slightly different way. I would suggest that the amount of traffic generated in March, April, May, June, July, August will not, or the traffic generated in the extra month during that month would not exceed or be different to what we would be generating the rest of the year. And therefore, if it's acceptable in those other months, how can it be an issue during the 1 month, additional month, when that traffic will be generated? That people could live in them for 11 months already, and therefore, as the point's been made, could be living there and travelling to work potentially for periods of that 11 months. Therefore, the nature of the vehicle movements is not hugely different. It's incrementally different, there's no doubt about that, but you could not demonstrate a significant difference. So it's already lost as a touring park. The impact on the green belt would not be materially different, or would be the same. Perhaps goes for us to say the highway issues are no different to those that were already addressed, and this is not an opportunity to put that genie back in the bottle. We are where we are as a starting point for this. Councillor Lepodovan's point about caravans and or lodges. The lodges are caravans. They fit within the meaning of the Caravan Act, which defines them. We're not permitting the structures as such, we're permitting the use of land for the siting of the caravans, which happen to be in the form of lodges on this site. And if I could perhaps draw your attention to condition 9, attached to the recommendation before you, it requires that the caravans are accommodated within the footprint of the area shown on the submitted drawing. So it does not allow those caravans, lodges, to grow to the maximum size permitted under the Caravans Act. It's prescribed by that plan, if you were minded to approve that plan, that they could not be bigger than that. So caravans, lodges, the terms are interchangeable. The lodges are caravans. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. Funnily enough, I know this site really, really well, and that's largely because my grandmother used to have a static caravan on it in the 60s, and I used to spend my summers down here, so I know the house, I know it really well. And what I know about it is an excellent tourist facility, and when you come and use a facility like this, can I just say, I think the touring element is actually a red herring. This is a facility for people to spend time here on holiday touring, and the kind of people that use them, whether they use them for 2 months of the year or 11 months of the year, tend not to be those who will put a drain on local public services. So, for example, I would spend the summer here with my grandma. We had a visitor mindset, so we would go out and we would put money into the local economy and we would use those local visitor facilities. What you don't have when you are visiting is a mindset of needing a doctor, needing local public facilities. You're maintaining your home at home and you're using those. And I think even the sorts of people that might spend many, many months of the year in tourism facilities still have their place at home. And there is a complete change from an 11-month tourism use to a 12-month living use. And I'm also familiar with this lane because I walked it with my suitcase with my grandma for 2 miles, and it's not an easy walk. The whole site is geared for tourists and for visitors and to spend time in their caravans or lodges as tourists, and I think it would be a great loss to lose that. And I think that the Greenbelt argument, I'm not sure that can be dismissed, because it's a mindset change. Using facilities for 11 months of the year to 12, well, people don't use tourism facilities for 11 months of the year. They come and they go even when they own that particular facility. So I would be also against this as well, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Councillor Bartlett, you wish to come back?
Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was really to respond to Mr. Evans' comments. I think I understand where he's coming from in terms of established planning consents, but the objection here, I think, is one of a change of use from tourism use as opposed to tourer caravan type use, tourism use, which is contrary to policy. I'd also like to, I think Mr. Evans asked us to look at the incremental changes that have occurred over the site. Well, I think looking at that, and I've got a direct question to ask Mr. Evans on this, is that once, if this were to be granted, then it would establish this site for residential use. What then is to stop all of the vans being removed and then an application being made to build permanent residential accommodation on this site? Because as an incremental change, once you actually go to the principle of establishing residential use on that piece of ground, then incrementally it's not such a big step to take the next step, is it? So perhaps Mr. Evans might like to just respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's a legitimate question. However, we're dealing here with the use of land, not the erection of buildings. If this was an application to erect buildings, the policy considerations would be quite different. This is about the use of land to site caravans on in a slightly different way to the extant permission to site caravans on this land. Does it move the marker slightly further down the road? Perhaps it does, but I don't think you should have regard to that in determining this application. This is quite a different animal. We did hear earlier on from, I think it was Councillor Mr. Stribley, about people could turn these caravans into buildings. They're not buildings. The application is, I have to keep reiterating that point, for the use of land for the siting of caravans. If the fact that these caravans have building-like appearances is irrelevant. They are caravans, they meet the requirements of the Caravan Act, and it's the use of land that you're considering, not putting buildings. If an application were to come in subsequently to erect a number of dwellings on this site, the policy considerations would be quite different to the policy considerations that are being brought to bear on the, and again, I keep coming back to that word I use, the incremental differences between what has already been approved on the site and the application before you today. That's the incremental point I was making. Not it's a series of steps heading in a particular direction. It's an incremental difference from what's already approved. Erection of housing on the site would be a substantial and significant change of direction in terms of the use of the land and respect to the policies that would apply. So simple answer, yes, it does perhaps move that count a little bit further across the board in terms of the considerations that would be brought to bear. I do not think that you should judge it on that basis, though, because it's quite a different consideration. I think that's as much as I can say on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor Stribley, you wish to come back?
Yes, Chairman, if I may, and I'll try and be brief. Councillor Dunlop actually said most of what I wanted to say absolutely perfectly and far more eloquently than I could have done. And Mr. Evans makes the use, it tries to imply that this is irrelevant to the use of the land. Quite frankly, when the use of the land becomes permanent residential, which it would if we followed the officer's recommendation on this, then it would be almost impossible in fairly short order to refuse an application for permanent dwellings, because that is what is being asked for here, that the lodges, be they caravans, wooden lodges, whatever, that they are permanently occupied on the site, and it then becomes a permanent residential site. I think there have been incremental changes over the years, and I think that is a problem. And the access for permanent use, and permanent use is quite different from people who are down there spending a few weeks at a time or even a couple of months at a time, and letting their friends share it, or even renting out to other people, as may happen. People who are down there on holiday or short term have a totally different mindset and a different way of living, as in effect we all know. The lane itself is a long lane, it's also unlit, and it's totally inappropriate. And it turns out onto a roundabout where the lane is the minor access road onto it. There is no footpath, there is no route through for people living there on a permanent basis. And I won't reiterate all my previous comments, but Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Dunlop had it off pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Stribley, could I just ask that you think of what policy reasons you're going to be using to refuse this whilst I carry on with other members that wish to speak?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tony O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. The questions I was about to ask in terms of the impact of permanent residents and also pedestrian safety, I think have now been asked by Councillors Stribley and Dunlop, so I will not repeat what they've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor O'Neill, sorry. Is there any other members wishing to speak at this time? No? Okay, so we have a move by Councillor Stribley, and that move has been seconded by Councillor Bartlett. I will just say that I will not support that move, as I've looked back at the history and I've listened to everyone, and I've listened very carefully to what the likes of Councillor Stribley, who I know was on this committee at that time. I've also listened very closely to Mr. Evans and what he has said about the incremental parts of this application, and I think that Councillor Hilliard made some very good points in what he said, in that we are looking to change just 1 month of the year, and I think the fact that these vehicles or these transport and things have been there for 11 months of the year, I can't see personally that 1 more month will make a great deal of difference, and so therefore I will not be supporting this move to refuse. I will, however, come to Councillor Stribley and ask if she could put forward her policy reasons for refusal before we go to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. To respond to yours, though, all caravan sites, holiday parks and so on have this 11th month of the year condition on them for the very reason that the change between temporary occupation and permanent is a totally different experience, as well illustrated by Councillor Dunlop. So my reasons for refusal is that it is inappropriate to turn this land in the green belt to permanent residential use, and in any event the access to the site is inadequate for permanent residential use. It is not on a bus route, it is not any easy access or safe access for pedestrians to any nearby facilities. I'm sure the officers put the wording in better form than that, but those are my reasons, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Dunlop, you wish to come forward?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something in, and I think when I talked about the mindset, I guess that we can't second guess everyone, but it is crossing a line from a tourism facility to somewhere that could be permanently lived in. So I would add that there is surely the loss of a tourism facility or the loss of tourism facilities in there. I suppose I was really talking to Councillor Stribley, actually, Chair.
Very happy to accept anything which strengthens the reasons for refusal.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for that. Mr. Evans, may I come to you, please?
Certainly, Chairman.
Mr. Evans, was there any comments from the Tourism Department with regarding this?
Yes, I don't think we've got anything on record, but clearly there have been conversations about whether we could demonstrate there was an issue. I think the report is quite explicit. It addresses the issue of the loss of tourism accommodation and whether that in itself would be a concern, because clearly the policy sets out that we will, the relevant policy sets out we will seek to protect existing tourism offer unless it can be demonstrated that it's not viable or is no longer required. In this case, the applicants have chosen not to submit information to demonstrate the absence of viability in terms of the existing tourism route, but what we've been unable to identify is any material harm to the tourism offer in Poole arising from this change. The point there being, whereas before the site was somewhat different in being a touring caravan and camping site, and the phrase touring has crept over in terms of it being a transient, whether that's for one night or for 3 weeks. It was not permanently fixed accommodation, so that's already gone. So what we're left with is a caravan site with permanent lodges and caravans, and the loss of those lodges and caravans was not seen as materially harming the tourism offer available generally within the locality. Part of the consideration that went into that is there have been a number of appeals. We are not the first authority to have to deal with issues of this kind in terms of caravan sites changing their nature over time. And there have been other sites elsewhere where inspectors have opined that incremental change from the tourism offer to a slightly more permanent use, or the potential for a more permanent use, and it's been very difficult for authorities to demonstrate harm from that. Perhaps that answers the question, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bartlett, are you asking to add PP23 to the refusals list?
Yeah. Yes, I am, Chair, because the report actually raises that and says that there was an identified conflict with policy PP23.
No problem.
It says that in the report.
Chairman.
And that is the loss. There is an identified conflict with policy PP23 in respect of the loss of tourist accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Dunlop.
Yes, Chairman. Sorry, I was just to expand on that point. As I said earlier, the touring aspect of this is kind of irrelevant. When you purchase a static holiday accommodation somewhere, the fact that it's there 11 months of the year or 12 months, well, 11 months of the year, it's a completely different viewpoint. It's there for you to use as you choose, and it is still tourism. When something changes to 12 months and there is the ability to permanently stay somewhere 12 months, the nature of that occupation will change. And I would propose that the nature of the person that might buy the caravan will change, and this will slowly deter the people who are using it for tourist accommodation. So I think there's a very real risk of a loss of tourist accommodation by that change. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move to the vote. As I say, we have a move by Councillor Stribley, seconded by Councillor Bartlett. Inappropriate, access inadequate, loss of tourism, and PP23. I will call each member's name in turn, and if you could indicate either by agreeing, refusing, or abstaining. Councillor Trent, I believe that you did not hear a vast amount of the debate and will therefore be abstaining on the vote from this one. Is that correct, please?
Yes, Chairman, that is correct. I lost sound for all of the presentation and just the beginning of the representation. So I checked with officers and they felt it was not appropriate for me to vote on it.
Thank you for that, Councillor Trent. Okay, in turn, Councillor McCormack, Vice Chairman.
Against.
Councillor Barron.
For the motion.
Are you, sorry, you're for the motion, yeah? So you're
Yep,
against the
yep.
application?
No.
Yeah, he's against the actual application to grant, so he's in favour with yourself, Councillor Stribley.
Sorry, Chairman.
Chair, can I ask you that you clarify even more clearly than you just have
Yeah,
what each statement means?
yeah. If you are for, then you are supporting the move by Councillor Stribley. If you are against, then you are not. So the move from Councillor Stribley is to refuse the application.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so I will come back again. I will just double check on everyone. Councillor McCormack.
Against.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Bull.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Decent.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
Against.
Councillor Lepodovin.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
And myself against. Mr. Tyler, could we have the numbers on that, please?
Yes, Chairman. Sorry, did you ask Councillor Tony O'Neill for his vote on that?
I did not. I apologise. Councillor O'Neill.
I think the chair gets me confused with Councillor Trent.
I do. There's too many Tonys.
Yeah, I will not forgive you. I am for the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Chairman. So the total number of votes for the motion is 10. The total number of votes against the motion is 3, and there was 1 abstention. So that motion has passed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So therefore that application has been refused. Thank you very much to all taking part in that one. We will now move on to the second application this afternoon. And I will ask Mr. Raven if he would prepare the screen for that application.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you confirm you can see the screen?
I can, Mr. Raven.
Thank you. I need to report that we have received 1 letter of late objection raising concerns about the potential impact of the access to the public footpath. This has been uploaded to the Council's website and is available for viewing. This does not raise any new issues that we have not previously considered.
Thank you, Mr. Raven.
So, Chairman, this application relates to the site of Templeman House on Leedham Road in Bournemouth, Northbourne. The application seeks consent for the demolition of the existing building and the erection of a 4-storey block of 27 flats, arranged as a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. The existing vehicle access would be retained and a total of 27 car parking spaces provided, together with an integral cycle store, detached bin store and an electricity substation. A secure pedestrian access to the public footpath and alley to the south has been reintroduced for use by the residents only. So firstly, I'd like to take you through the general characteristics of the application site, of the aid of some aerial views and photographs. On the screen you can see the site outlined in red. Leedham Road is to the north, Hillview Road to the south and Western Avenue to the east. There's an aerial view showing the site within the centre and the same roads north, east and south. This again shows the existing building on the site. As you can see, the site is located within a largely dense residential area, which is characterised by a mix of building types, including detached bungalows, 2-storey detached, semi-detached and terrace dwellings, as well as purpose-built 3-storey blocks of flats, which you can see in the background on the screen. The majority of the larger buildings are red brick with clay tiled roofs, whilst bungalows tend to include render. So as we can see, the site consists of a large 3-storey building, the last use of which was a residential care home, but it's currently vacant, has been for a couple of years. Prior approval has been granted for its demolition. The site is very large and contains many trees which are protected by preservation orders. The dense boundary screening shields the site from much of the surrounding area, as you can see. I'm just going to go through the site for a few more viewpoints just to get some more perspective. So you have Western Avenue in the foreground and the site within the middle. Hillview Road is to the left and Leedham Road is to the right. This is the view of the access from Leedham Road. This is a view from Hillview Road, and you can see the access to the public footpath. This is another view of the other end of the public footpath on Western Avenue. And this is another view from Western Avenue, which you can just see the roof of the existing building in the background there. This is a view from within the site of the existing building. It's another site photo. Just gives you an idea of the scale of the existing building. This is from within the site and shows an access route through to the public footpath, which has previously been stopped up. Looking at the block plans, on the left you see the existing building, on the right you see the proposal. So officers undertook pre-application discussions with the applicant, and as highlighted in the report, we negotiated some revisions to the scheme after the submission, and these included the introduction of a secure pedestrian gate to the public footpath to the south for use by the residents of the development only, the removal of full height clear glazing on the north-east facing rear elevation, and the reduction in the depth of the building on the north-east rear elevation, and a number of positive design amendments. We've also negotiated additional tree planting on the north-east boundary, as well as amendments to the parking layout, cycle storage and circulation paths to ensure compliance with your parking SPD. I'm just going to show you some plans of the proposal, which hopefully you've all seen before. Just to scroll through the floor plans, essentially the same from ground up to the 3rd floor. And this section gives you an idea of the changes from the existing building to the proposal. And you see Leedham Road is basically on the left-hand side. Again, this is from Leading Road with Western Avenue to the left. You can see the change in the bulk of the building when compared to the existing. This is a photo montage taken from the access. This is from the other side. So the site is essentially a closed plot with mature screening on a significant proportion of its boundaries. So the proposed building would not be readily viewed in the context of any other neighbouring properties, so it is considered reasonable for it to create its own contemporary character. The finish of the building is modernist in its design, with a main flat roof and a parapet, complemented with 3 feature low mono-pitched roof elements. And these break up what would be an expansive flat roof whilst adding interest and articulation. So the combination of flat and mono-pitched roof is considered to work better than a more traditional roof form, given that the depth of the building would require a much higher pitched roof. The central core and main entrance creates a design feature with a full height glazing and zinc framing. The window openings have a regular rhythm and on the principal elevation follow the pitch line of the feature roof elements. The elevations are well articulated with steps in to introduce depth to the facades, and the main built form would be finished in a buff brick with timber effect cladding and brown zinc elements. So this palette of materials is considered to reflect the treed character of the site and provides the building with its own identity. The design and finish are considered to be of good quality and would not have an adverse impact on the character or appearance of the area. This would be complemented by hard surfacing in a combination of coloured block paving to create a home zone. Whilst the development would be taller than the surrounding housing, there are examples of similar height flats within the vicinity of the site, and the existing mature boundary screening would help mitigate the visual presence of the structure. It is noted, however, that the building would be taller than the principal height of the existing building, with the main roof element being 0.7 metres higher than the highest part of the existing property and 1.6 metres higher than the main ridge. The highest point of the 2 highest feature roof slopes would be a further 2.3 metres above this. However, the building would not be as wide as existing structure on site, and its footprint would be 160 square metres smaller. The depth of the building would be around double that of the main 3-storey element of the existing building, so the bulk of the proposed building would be greater. However, the building is considered to sit comfortably within the plot with good spacing to the boundaries. The building would not encroach into any root protection areas of protected trees, and additional planting and landscaping will increase the number of trees and green areas within the site. So the scale of built form is considered appropriate in this instance. With regard to the impact on the amenities of surrounding residents, this has been fully assessed in line with local policies, adopted guidance as well as national guidance, and the full assessment is contained within the officer's report. However, I should point out that the separation distances to neighbouring properties meet or exceed the stated distances within your adopted design guide. Through the revisions negotiated by officers, which consist of the reduction in the depth of the building on its northeastern side, the removal of balconies, the removal of full height windows, and together with increased boundary planting, which would be secured through Condition 17, the impact on neighbouring occupiers, particularly those on Western Avenue, has been mitigated and the impact is considered acceptable, particularly given the historic relationship with the existing building. There will undoubtedly be a noticeable change, however, given the context of the site and the circumstances mitigated, and this change is not considered to be of a harmful degree to withhold consent in this instance. In terms of the future occupiers, all residential units would meet or exceed the technical housing standards, nationally described space standard, and all units would have a dual aspect. 21 of the 27 units would have private balcony or terrace. The remaining properties can make use of the communal gardens. Whilst a private space per unit would be preferable, this cannot be provided for the reasons of privacy. The proposed living conditions are therefore considered appropriate and acceptable. Chairman, as I stated, the site and surrounding area is covered by individual and group tree preservation orders. The majority of the site's trees are to be retained and suitably protected. The felling of a small number of limited quality category U trees is to be carried out, and these consist of 4 apple trees, a cherry tree and a cypress. Your tree officer does not consider this to be a major harm, and they can be replaced with a suitable soft landscaping scheme for the site, and they would require removal in any event due to their poor health. 2 further trees will require minor pruning back to clear the proposed new building. However, this pruning is required regardless of the redevelopment, as the crowns are very close to the corner of the existing building. Again, no objections have been raised by your tree officer. There is new drainage proposed within the root protection areas of trees, and this has been addressed in the arboricultural method statement, detailing how it can be achieved without tree root damage. A car park falls into the root protection area of 1 tree, however the existing surface in this location is tarmac, therefore no harm should occur. With regard to parking and highway safety, the development has been fully assessed by your highways officer. Your parking SPD requires at least 23 unallocated parking spaces to service this development, and as 27 spaces are proposed, this exceeds the requirements and is therefore acceptable. Amended plans were received which ensure all parking spaces now meet the required standards. Electric vehicle charging points will be provided and secured through condition 12. Secure cycle parking for 28 bicycles is proposed within the main building and is considered acceptable. Revised plans were provided which ensure the cycle store meets the required standards. A detached bin store is proposed close to the main vehicle entrance and has been designed to reflect the design of the main building and is considered acceptable and appropriate. Chairman, a public footpath runs along the south-east boundary of the site, linking Western Avenue with Hillview Road, and this is designated as an adopted highway along the section adjacent to the site, meaning that cycling is permitted towards Hillview Road. There has historically been an access from the site to the public footpath, although this was closed at some point in the past. And whilst the applicant has suggested that the existing pedestrian and cycle facilities do not need to be improved as they are comparable with existing use, your highways officer strongly disagrees with this, as there will be a significant increase in pedestrian and cycle movements to and from the site. Residents of the care home would have been unlikely to undertake frequent walking or cycling trips from the site, and if they did, would likely have walked just a short distance, for which existing access at Eden Road would have been adequate. The majority of movements would have been from staff, and given that many would likely drive to work, these trips would be during working hours and infrequent in nature. Conversely, the proposed residential use could result in the majority of residents choosing to cycle or walk to and from the site, often for much greater distances, so the requirement for a 28 space cycle store is indicative of this. So to ensure this proposal is fully compliant with your policy CS18, adequate infrastructure is required to provide the residents with a realistic opportunity to use sustainable travel modes. In this instance, a link to the public highway to the south is necessary to provide the most direct route to local amenities in Columbia Road, and beyond that, the local districts centres of Winton and the town centre of Bournemouth. So revised plans were submitted which reintroduced the access and provides a secure, lockable gate which will only be accessible to the residents of the development and managed by the council's housing section. A number of concerns have been raised by residents in relation to this. The main issue appearing to be the potential for increased antisocial behaviour. I would suggest that the route would be well overlooked by the proposed development, which would act as a deterrent to antisocial and criminal behaviour. The increased use of the footpath would actually aid in the reduction of existing antisocial behaviour currently experienced, as increased footfall would soon become a deterrent for those looking to congregate. With regard to the issue raised alluding to a potential increase in parking on Hillview Road, the development includes 27 unallocated parking spaces, which exceeds the 23 required. Therefore, the parking SPD dictates that the full parking requirement can be accommodated within the site with additional spaces available, and that there will be no parking displaced on the street, whether this be occupiers or visitors. And as the parking spaces are unallocated, these are available to visitors at all times. The turning area to the northern end of Hillview Road, this lies adjacent to 3 private accesses and the public right-of-way, all of which combine to form one continuous drop curve along its northern edge. So if vehicles are currently parking across these accesses, then it is a matter of enforcement which can be reported to the council and subsequently dealt with. It is unreasonable to assume that any additional parking on an unrestricted road with spare capacity will obstruct private accesses, and again, such an argument could not be defended by the local highways authority. In terms of the requirement to provide affordable housing, the applicant is the council's housing section and all units will be affordable housing. However, in order to meet the requirements of your adopted affordable housing policy, a condition is proposed which ensures that at least 40% of the units are made available as affordable housing, and the applicant has agreed to this under condition 7. The required contribution for heat mitigation will also be secured through a unilateral undertaking, and the development will also be subject to a payment for the community infrastructure levy. Chairman, as I've said before, it's acknowledged that the proposed building is higher than its immediate neighbours. However, given the need for affordable housing and the fact that the building would be contained within a treed site rather than forming part of a street scene, together with the revisions negotiated, the height and bulk as proposed would be acceptable, and the impact on neighbouring occupiers has been fully explored and mitigated where necessary. The development makes more efficient use of an underutilised site. The development provides needed affordable housing. The scale and design of development are appropriate. The level of parking provision conforms to your adopted parking SPD. The development would not have an adverse impact on highway safety. There would not be any harmful impact to protected trees, and the heat mitigation and affordable housing provision are policy compliant. Lastly, Chairman, it's understood that the development is to be built to passive house standards and have solar panels on the roof. Electric vehicle charging points are also proposed, and this is fully supported given the declaration of a climate emergency, and it's hoped that this scheme will be an exemplar council development leading the way for future sustainable developments. Your officer's recommendation is therefore one of approval in line with the recommendation and conditions cited in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. I will now hand over to Mr. Tyler to read out the letters of objection. Mr. Tyler?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So for this application, we have received 2 written statements in objection, 1 written statement in support, and I believe that Councillor Jackie Edwards is with us today in the meeting, and she will address the committee as ward councillor. So the first letter of objection has been received by a Mr. Andrew Barnes, who is a local resident of number 1, The Paddocks. His statement is as follows. The Highways Agency state that they want the cycle path and walkways in the grounds of Templeman House to be 3 metres wide. Does that mean the lockable gate will also be 3 metres wide? I took some photos looking at the area of the fence from both the public alleyway and my private road, The Paddocks, and looking over the fence at the existing pathway inside Templeman House. There are 2 TPO protected trees on the left and right of the existing pathway up to the fence. A 3 metre wide pathway up to within the 0.5 metres of the fence wouldn't fit, and the gate opening inwards would not have room to swing round due to the protected trees and a telegraph pole also in the area. If the 2 trees mentioned were felled, not only would this ruin the natural shielding would ruin the natural shielding screening you mentioned, but also go against the statement that no harm will come to any of the trees other than the several we know about and 2 trees that need pruning. If the shielding is lost and a big gap appears where the pathway leads out onto the alleyway, I would have major privacy issues and this would not be acceptable. My property is already likely to be devalued as a result of this project, and some of my collateral loss, meaning if I sell, I would not get the asking price, so could not relocate to another like property, so I am being set up to fail as it is. You state the alleyway linking Hillview Road to Western Avenue is a public highway. Does the Highways Agency think this is a road and not a public alleyway? Hence they argue your pathway has to be 3 metres wide, which is effectively a single track road width. The public alleyway is protected by complex ownership rights, as it was part of an ancient bridle path down to Parley and cannot be interfered with. Why must there be a 3-metre wide cycle pathway in the grounds of Templeman House for only a few hundred yards, as cyclists will set off, then immediately have to disembark to open the gate out onto the public alleyway? I myself live in number 1 The Paddocks, which is a private road written into the deeds of all our bungalows, and we own it. I've been made to feel very insecure and cannot enjoy life at the moment due to various family illnesses, my mum being diagnosed with cancer, and the backdrop that this application is set against. The anxiety the application is causing and the fact that the public consultation wasn't listened to does not give me much faith in the council. That is the end of Mr. Andrew Barnes' statement. I will now read out the second statement in objection, which has been received by Mr. Anthony Hand, who has been consulted with a number of residents and is writing on their behalf. His statement is as follows. I'm in total objection pertaining to the current building design of a 4-storey block. It is not appropriate to build higher than the current building. I can agree on 3 stories and a roof, but not 4 and a roof, for several blindingly obvious reasons. Reason 1. It is a very quiet part of Northbourne, with Puxdale protected woodlands and the existing TPO both inside the grounds and surrounding a high build will be too heavy on the land and subsequent environments. Reason number 2. 4-storey high looks into our gardens above our neighbours' existing fences and windows beyond. Reason 3. Your current proposal looks good and I congratulate you on such an environmentally friendly design. However, you are putting a burden on the land surrounding and structural roots and water flows leading to the brook and pond, both in property and adjacent land and gardens. Reason 4. The building is on a turn direct flight path heading from entry to runway 26/08. This will prove to be extremely disturbing to this 4-storey build as it currently is. I see no alternative than to recommend the architect resubmits the build for only 3 stories, of which by demolishing a 3-storey structure and replacing with a sensible new eco-build. Many neighbours are in support of only like-for-like height, and so are my dearly departed relatives who would be certain to ensure no such build took such a ridiculous height. Access into the lane and alleyway leading from Western Avenue to Hillview Road should not be opened from the new build. It creates a run-out/throughway from criminal activity, for example, helmetless motorbike riders, drug dealers that have been noted currently by residents, as well as this being a no-go zone. Any young family within the new build will struggle to contain eye contact if that access gate is granted open. Confusion of access will result in trespass to the other adjacent properties and will incur distress and temptation. This alleyway has been maintained by the council and on occasion by myself clearing rubbish and leaves. I fail to see the need to create an opening at all. By the existing one-way in, one-way out of Templeman House, it is a given that will be secure and provide confidence to the new residents. I was left with this task to ensure that this is stopped and done in the best possible way to protect Northbourne's looks and heritage by family and friends. That is the end of the statement of objection from Mr. Anthony Hand. And I will now proceed to read out the statement in support of the application, which has been submitted by Mr. Steve Wildman from PDP Architecture on behalf of the applicant. The proposals before you today have undergone several iterations prior to being submitted. We have worked closely with the planning officers and revised the scheme following comments from the design review panel and from the public consultation. There are several constraints we have had to design around, such as the existing TPO belt, which is extensive and reduces the buildable area of the site. We have designed around the TPOs, leaving it untouched and enhancing in other areas to create a surrounding green buffer zone for the development. The design ethos of the proposals was to not create one large monolithic block of apartments, but to break the massing down horizontally and also vertically through a series of connected and stepping design features. We wanted to create a main arrival point that was flooded with light, but also adds to the function of the building by creating an atrium which can be used for natural passive ventilation. The choice behind the materials is to blend in with the woodland context, whilst creating contemporary features so that the building is of its time. The bronze zinc paired with the buff brick creates a softer palette than choosing a standard grey, for example. These materials are also hard wearing and will retain their aesthetics for a longer period of time. The aspirations of this project is a fabric first approach, and we have designed to aspire to passive house standards. As such, we have a plant room and a larger service cupboards within the flats to allow for the ground source heat equipment. Parapets have been included within the design to hide the PVs we will have mounted on the roof. Whilst the proposals are slightly higher than the existing, our overall footprint is 78% of the existing footprint, which allows us to pull the overall build form towards the southern side of the site. We have been careful to reduce the overlooking to the neighbours by designing the apartments to have the majority of windows looking east, west and south, by keeping the ones to the north minimal and reduced in size. The existing nursing home has more windows looking towards the neighbouring properties than we are proposing. Private balconies to the north have been removed, with side-facing ones being provided with frosted privacy screens to omit any overlooking by residents using them. The local residents' concerns regarding the access path are noted, however it has been retained at the request of Highways to mitigate potential antisocial issues raised. It is proposed to gate this access with fob access for residents only. We hope to increase visibility to the existing alley by changing the existing close boarded fencing on the boundary of Templeman House for a metal railing. We hope the members follow the officer's recommendation to approve this scheme. And that is the end of the statement from Mr. Steve Wildman of PDP Architects. Thank you, Chairman. I'll pass you back now to introduce Councillor Edwards as Ward Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Councillor Edwards, would you like to address the committee, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Templeman House planning application raised a number of concerns when the council decided that the care home would be demolished and replaced by flats. There was a good number of local people who went to the public consultation where some of their concerns were taken on board in the design. However, one issue many residents were against was the opening of an entrance onto Hillview Road. On the planning application in March, there was no access from this part of the site. At a later date, an amended plan showed a gate being put in the corner of the grounds to access Hillview Road. Although the planning officer did put up blue notices, I would just like to comment that this was a sneaky amendment that so many residents were against. This is a council project, and if this was the practice in the past to amend plans without most of the public being aware, then this new transparent council needs to ensure that this is not repeated. Concerns have been raised that having a gate may encourage more antisocial behaviour, as it is reported that drug dealing in the alleyway is commonplace. To allay residents' fears, can I suggest better lighting is put both in the alleyway that connects Western Avenue and Hillview Road, and good lighting on the pathways of the new development. This is an area with many trees, and whilst I don't advocate lighting it up like a football pitch, making residents feel safe and secure is a priority and could help deter the antisocial behaviour. I would like to finish with the hope that if the application is passed, the council will oversee and manage this housing and not hand it over to a housing association. I would also like to see a monitoring of the vehicle movements in Leedham Road and a monitoring of the gate, if adopted, into Hillview Road. If current residents of these roads are adversely affected, I would hope measures would be taken to alleviate problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Mr. Raven, is there anything you'd like to come back on before I go over to board members?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think a lot of the points raised I did well covered in actually my presentation. However, the first objector, Mr. Barnes, alluded to the fact that highways were looking for a 3-metre wide fence to the public footpath, and that this could have an impact on protected trees. I don't think highways were after a 3-metre wide gate. Sorry, not fence, gate. I think the actual footpath one needs to be 3 metres wide, so to enable pedestrians and cyclists to be able to pass each other within the site. The actual access can be single width access, so it would need to be about 1.5 metres in width. I'm very confident that such a gate of that size would not have any detrimental impact on any of the surrounding trees. I don't have anything further to add, I don't think. The lighting scheme, potential lighting, additional lighting for the footpath, that would be a matter for the Highway Authority to consider. I think there is a condition attached relating to hard landscaping, which would include details to be submitted for a lighting scheme internal to the site. So yes, there would be lighting to the footpath internally. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. Councillor Bartlett, you are the ward councillor for this area also. Would you like to speak, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to ask the planning officer, if I may, could you point out exactly where the access to the footpath is from the site? Is it sort of in the middle? Yeah, okay, I've got it, thanks. Thank you. Right, I've got a number of issues to raise here, and it's a bit disappointing that, having had a public consultation where so many people raised the issue surrounding the access to the footpath, that it was actually taken away from the scheme. For some reason, it's now reappeared, because this was probably the main objection raised by most of the people that attended the consultation, and have made comments online as well, of which I've read all of them. But there are a number of issues. I'll come back to that issue in a minute, but I do have some other concerns. And one is the height of the building. Now, initially, when the first scheme was presented, it was actually 3 stories. It had a pitched roof. And I have to say I was very impressed with the original design, but somehow it seems to have morphed into 4 stories with a flat roof. Now, I don't know of any other flat roof developments in the area. In fact, the highest one I'm aware of is 3 stories, and all of those developments, where they are flats, have got pitched roofs. So I do think that this building is completely out of character for the area, particularly because of the flat roof, and in particular because of the height. Now, the planning officer says, well, it doesn't really matter about that because no one can see it anyway, because it's shrouded by trees. Well, that's not actually completely the case, because you can see very clearly when you look from Leedham Avenue, there's a very clear view of the building. And also for the residents that live in Western Avenue in particular, particularly around 153 to 159, I think it is, the boundary of the site actually borders their back gardens. Now, whilst I understand that efforts have been made to protect the privacy in some ways by removing the balconies that were originally planned there, nevertheless, this building is considerably higher, and I think if you actually add it up, it's probably going to be about 3 meters higher if you add up the various dimensions that we were given earlier on. I think the picture you're looking at the moment there is a bit misleading, because when you actually walk along the street and you look between the houses, you can see quite clearly the existing building is quite dominant actually, and the new building will be even more dominant to those people. And I think it will actually have a kind of an overbearing effect on it. So that's the size and the character. Now, just to now go back to the gate. The impact in terms of the potential for additional parking in Hillview Road, if a gate is positioned there, then that is a real probability. But I do accept the highways officer's contention that you can't stop people parking on highways where there are no yellow lines. You know, everyone's free to do that. But the real issue about this is the change in character in particular to the amenity of the residents of Hillview Road. For years and years, they're used to a quiet cul-de-sac basically, and now, because access will be given to that footpath from the new development, it will completely change. It will completely change the sort of environment for those people that live down the bottom of that cul-de-sac, because it will become a fairly busy thoroughfare. And it was interesting to hear that it is actually not a footpath, it's actually a highway. So you can expect people to be going up and down there on mopeds and scooters and all sorts, I would imagine. And given the number of flats there, I suspect there's going to be a significant number of movements through it. So it will affect the people that live in the bottom of Hillview Road. Now, just going back to the consultation, what on earth is the point of having a consultation, taking all those views from the residents, and the objections they made were quite real, they were very reasonable in what they were saying, then to say, okay, we agree with you, and then quietly change their mind and put it back in again, and there's no real justification for it. I think if it weren't for this, this access to the footpath, I would probably sort of accede to the other concerns that I've got. But this one issue about the effect it has on the residents in Hillview Road by providing that access through into what is now considered to be a highway, I think is unreasonable. And I'm very disappointed that it's gone back in there. Because let's face it, you know, if you actually look at the access from Leedham Road, access to the site, you can exit through Leedham Road and get into Western Avenue very easily through to Western Avenue. You don't actually need that additional access at the back. So I think I'll leave it at that at the moment. It'd be interesting to hear what other people have said. I will have to say that in principle, I'm very supportive of social housing going in on this site. But people that do know me will know I'm a keen advocate of social housing. And if it weren't for the issues that I've raised, I'd have no trouble at all in supporting it. But I think, you know, you've had a public consultation, people have given their voice to it, we should listen to it. And where we have listened to it and agreed to their concerns, to then go back on that afterwards quietly, I think is completely wrong. So I'll leave it at that for a moment, thank Chair, and listen to what other people have got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Mr. Raven, did you want to come back on anything that Councillor Bartlett has said, particularly about the gate, etc.?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the access to the public footpath was removed following the public consultation by the applicants. The reason it was reintroduced, and it was not done sneakily, I have to say, was at the request of the highways officer and the urban design officer. Now they wanted a full public access route through the site. I didn't believe that this was appropriate, so the compromise was reached, having to have a private access for use of the residents only. And the reason for that access, I mean, if I can, I'd like to invite Mr. Kemp from the highway section to go over the reasoning for that, as he's in a better position to do that, and also to respond to Councillor Bartlett's issue about the parking on Hillview Road. So if Mr. Kemp's available, I'd like to invite him to speak.
That's absolutely fine. Mr. Kemp, are you available to speak?
I am. Thank you very much, Chair.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Kemp.
Thank you. Well, in regards to the parking conditions on Hillview Road, quite rightly raised by Mr. Bartlett, as said in the response, in terms of the actual parking provision on site, it fully complies and indeed exceeds what we would require in the parking SPD, and therefore is fully compliant with policy CS16. So it would be highly unreasonable for us to offer any other view that the parking is satisfactory. Indeed, the nature of the parking is unallocated, and that will allow visitors in particular to park on the site at any time of day and night. So in regards to that aspect, I think that is covered. With regards to the reasoning for forcing through a path to the south, essentially to provide direct access to amenities further afield, Columbia Road, Winton and Bournemouth Town Centre, which are well within commuter distance for cyclists and indeed leisure routes on coastal destinations, etc. And it's the convenience around that direct route that is the desire route. It's not desirable for someone to come out of the cycle store, cycle 300 metres, 400 metres around to the north to then head in the southerly direction. Just simply the installation of a cycle store for this scale of development is not deemed adequate to encourage the cycling mode of transport. Thus, we have sought to have a accessible and convenient route to facilitate that cycle store also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Before I come back to other members of RTS, I'm going to come back to Councillor Bartlett, because I'm sure his question is in relation to this. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I wasn't complaining about the parking. No objection to that. I understand it conforms to the supplementary planning document. No, it is the effect on the character of the living areas for those living at the bottom of Hillview Road. And in terms of providing a direct route to the town, it is not 300 to 400 metres additional cycling from the site to access that. All you've got to do is just cycle probably no more than 100 metres down the lane, or down the main road to Western Avenue, and you're on a main route through to all the areas that you're talking about: Columbia Road, the buses, Leybourne Avenue, and in fact there are not very far away from that there are a parade of shops. There's confectioners, the newsagent, etc., that can be accessed directly through from Leedham Road. So the argument that provides a very convenient access through to the town centre and all the rest of it doesn't really hold water. But of course, even if you were to accept that, what you've got to balance that again is the effect that it could have on the people already living, as I keep saying, at the bottom of Hillview Road. It will change the nature of their living environment significantly, and you've got to take that in mind. And all development should take into account the effect on existing residential amenity, and I don't think that due consideration has been given to that in this particular case. Now, as I said, if I could easily forget the other issues that I've raised regarding overbearing and size and roof and design, all the rest of it. But this one issue is the burning issue that I think we really need to think about again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I actually find this quite an interesting development. I think it's very sympathetic to the area around it. Comments have been made about the height of the new building. I actually think it's contained quite well within the previous height. And if that previous building was there under the new and was privately owned or whatever, under the new permitted development rights that were launched this Monday from the government, that could be 7 metres higher without requiring planning permission. This is compared to the maximum of 2.6 metres, and that 2.6 metres is a peak height rather than an overall height, because I think it was said in the presentation that 1.3 is the increase in height over most of the site. So I don't think height's a problem. I think the fact it's 27 flats and 27 parking spaces is actually quite good, considering some of those flats are single bedroom. I do think that 100% affordable is fantastic, and if we could do with more than that. As for the path, I can understand where people are coming from with antisocial behaviour, but that would happen with or without the entrance to the a pedestrian and cycle entrance to the building from that site. And actually, the council or the whoever ultimately manages it, because I know all that's up for discussion in the future, could actually mitigate the problems in that alleyway by installing behind the gate. Bear in mind the gate is a secure gate that is accessed by fob, so you haven't got people wandering through. But they could mitigate the problems by installing a CCTV camera just inside. That monitors the comings and goings, but it could also oversee what's happening actually in the bit that leads up to the gate. So I think that's something which could be overcome quite easily. I agree with the dual entrance. I think it makes sense to have the dual entrance. But I welcome this. I think this is a good development. It's well designed, and I find it encouraging that there is something that's going to be 100% social rented, affordable. So I think this is a positive, and I fully support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Podovin.
Hello, Councillor Trent has actually said a lot of the things I want to say. I think on the whole this is a very good development. I'm very impressed that it's going to be 100% affordable. I'm even more impressed that it's going to be up to high passive house standards. That's the way we should be going with all the applications that we receive. At the moment, we can't insist on this on private developers, but I'm delighted to see that BCP is putting its money where its mouth is and working on the climate emergency motion that we agreed about a year ago, and setting a great example. I take the point about the alleyway and the gate to some extent, but I was thinking along the antisocial behaviour line. Here we have a site that's been empty with a derelict building for some time. That sort of site is often a magnet for antisocial behaviour. I don't know whether that has been the case, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. No doubt the officers could enlighten us. But with a fully occupied site, with people coming and going, lighting, a tidy environment, that should be a deterrent. My one concern actually would be about the gate. What sort of a gate? I know it's fob operated, but the dimensions of it, because we don't want anything that can be climbed over. So presumably it will be, I assume, the same height as the surrounding fence cum wall, which is nothing very special to look at. I don't know whether the intention is that that's replaced like for like, but the gate certainly would need to be of a height that people would not climb over it. But that apart, I welcome this, and I'm very happy to propose that we accept.
Thank you. Mr. Raven, would you like to comment on the gates, etc.?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There's a condition attached requiring boundary treatment to be submitted, so that can be agreed at a later date. It's envisaged that, yes, the gate would be at least same height as a new fence, which would be at least 1.8 metres in height, potentially 2 metres. That would mitigate any potential persons being able to climb over that particular structure. Again, the applicant has stated that it would be a electronic fob accessed gate with a closing mechanism, so it will close automatically after someone has opened, and only the residents would have access to those fobs. I think it's the intention of the applicant to look for a metal railing type boundary, so that would allow views through from the site to the alley, which would further improve the security and overlooking, and a further distraction from potential antisocial behaviour. Like I said, it will be dealt with by condition, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. Councillor Podavent has proposed the.
Yeah, will do.
Do I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. So, moving on, Councillor O'Neill.
Some questions really for Officer Raven. We've heard lots of discussion about the difference in height, and I've recorded 3 different numbers. Can the officer confirm the precise difference in height is question 1. Question 2, the proposed building, or the footprint of the building on one of the earlier slides before and after, it appears the building has moved to the northeast of the site from its central location prior. What is the distance between that and the houses that it will or may overlook? And the last question is really about occupancy. I know we talk readily about 27 spaces or parking spaces meeting the criteria, but sadly often the criteria fall short because of the occupancy and their propensity to own cars. Is there not a real risk of parking on street which causes further problems, particularly when it comes to street safety and street cleansing? They're the 3 questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Raven.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So in terms of the height, the main flat roof element of the proposed building would be 1.6 metres higher than the main ridge of the existing building. Now, like I said, there are 4 feature roof elements, 3 feature roof elements which protrude higher than that, but obviously they only punctuate the sky at one certain point. And the highest point of the tallest 2 of those features would be 3.9 metres higher than the ridge of the existing building.
Could you clarify, was that 3.9 metres?
3.9, yeah, that's but only at one point. So the main roof would be 1.6 metres higher than the main ridge of the existing building.
Right.
Okay. Sorry, could you just go over the other 2 points? I might have missed those.
The second one was regard to the moving of the property.
Talking about a difference between, in round terms, 5.5 feet and 12.5 feet above existing roof height.
Yeah. So if you look at the image in front of you,
yeah,
this element here, which is the main height of the main building.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 1.6 metres higher than the ridge of the existing building.
Okay.
This point here in the centre is a further 2.3 metres above that, so a total of 3.9 metres above the main ridge of the existing building. But obviously it's only for that point and that point there.
Yeah, but if you take the angle of the roof going to the left from its highest point, it is quite noticeably different in terms of its bulk. The second question was the footprint of the building.
Yeah,
that's it. In terms of that repositioning or that bulk to the right, much was made of the smaller footprint, but it does appear that the main element of the wall to the northeast side is nearer to the houses. What is the distance between that and the houses?
Yep. Okay. So a lot of the footprint has been brought away from the northern boundary, and yes, there is a more constrained built form, which allows for obviously a more efficient use of the building. In terms of the separation distance, I think it's in excess of 30 metres.
Right. Okay.
From the rear, the closest single-storey rear element of the properties on Western Avenue to the closest part of the proposal on the northeast elevation. So it's in excess of 30 metres. Okay, and
in terms of the trees or foliage between that, in that separation distance of 90 metres, how much of that is existing and TPO'd, and how much of that is proposed new planting?
So on the drawing in front of you, all of these darker trees are existing and they're protected and they will be retained. The trees that these ones here I'm circling, they are the new planting, and they will be, well, we're hoping they're going to be a semi-mature species, so they will be fairly tall when they're planted, and that can be agreed as part of the condition for soft landscaping.
Okay, and the last part of my question related to parking. 27 apartments, 27 spaces unallocated. It meets current regulations, but I mean, what's the likelihood that a number of those apartments will own at least one car, which will push vehicles out on the surrounding street? And then we have the next complaint of pedestrian safety and also the inability for the council to cleanly cleanse its streets.
So the car ownership details within your parking SPD, they are based on real car ownerships in certain areas of Bournemouth. So the parking requirement is taken from a direct figure of what car ownership actually is in that area, and what's being proposed exceeds the requirement of the parking requirement for that area. That's really all I can say about that. I mean, I can again invite Mr. Kemp to respond to the level of car parking if you so wish.
Yes, I'd like to hear more, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kemp?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Mr. Raven has just said, I can only reiterate that it does comply with policy and the benchmark requirements, in fact exceed it, and again, because of the nature of the parking, it's considered that visitors will have the ability to park on site in a more efficient parking manner. You know, with any development of a certain scale, this 27 flats, obviously hypothetically there could be additional visitor parking on surrounding streets, but in terms of what we're assessing it against the benchmark requirements. There is, as Charles was saying, that takes into account the census data of car ownership, and that's our standard, which it meets. You know, if vehicles are parking inconsiderately in Hillview Road, ultimately that's a matter of enforcement that can be reported to the council and dealt with under Traffic Management Act 2004. It's unreasonable to assume that additional parking, visitor parking for this development, if there were any displaced, that with the unrestricted road 100 metres long with no parking restrictions, that they would be parking inconsiderately in that case anyway. So there really is no justification to suggest this will have an impact on highway safety. Perhaps, as Councillor Bartlett said, local amenity is more of a concern, but that wouldn't be a reason for a highway refusal in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'll be with you in there you are. I think this is a very attractive and well-designed development. I'd quite like to put my name down for it. It really does look really good on that picture. I'm not overly concerned about the additional height on the building, because there is a considerable distance to the nearest neighbouring property, and there is also substantial screening all around the plot. So yes, it will be taller, it will be visible against the skyline, but I don't think there's any fear of anybody feeling that the residents in these flats can peer straight down into their back gardens and have sort of close look at them. So I'm not too concerned about that. The only thing that has worried me in coming up in the debate is the talk about the access to the pedestrian way, the footpath, and by fob access. To me, that is fraught with problems and future difficulties. Presumably, most flats will have 2 occupants. I guess some of the single bedroom may only have 1, but there will probably be 2 in most of the apartments, and in a few of them 3 or more where the second bedroom is also occupied. So by the time you've got a couple there and perhaps teenage children, you're going to need 3 fobs from it. And you know how fobs get lost, keys get lost, etc. And I have a private development in my ward where an access gate is meant to be for pedestrians, for the residents only. But because of over the years fobs are lost and this, that and the other, the gate actually is virtually permanently opened. I think you need a plan B there. I know it sounds easy, well, let's have a fob. I've got one for my own gate, and sometimes it doesn't work, or sometimes I've mislaid it, and that can be a nuisance. But where you have a development of 27 apartments, I think you're certainly going to get a problem with that. So I don't have any problem with the planning issue here, but I would suggest that whoever is going to be running and managing this maybe needs to rethink how they operate the gate. And is it actually necessary to certainly have a self-closure on the gate so that it doesn't remain open, but is it actually necessary to be locked? That's for somebody else's decision. It won't affect my vote on the planning. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was just a basic clarification. I believe we've got a motion on the table to approve, but do we can we say approval without a gate?
I don't believe we can. I think what we would need to do is approve it and ask to have a note added to say that would they reconsider about the gate. But I'll ask Mr. Raven for his opinion on that. Mr. Raven.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think a note could be added for to ask the applicants to rethink that element. Obviously, originally they did not propose the access, and so I'm pretty certain that they would not object to its removal. The reason for the access, as we previously discussed, was as a requirement from highways. We would have to liaise with the Highways Department and Mr. Camp to see whether or not there would be a fundamental objection in terms of their support for the scheme if that access was removed. But obviously at the moment the motion is to approve the scheme as it is in front of you without any alterations to the conditions or the plans.
Thank you, Mr. Raven.
Sorry, Chairman, as I raised the point, if I could come back in, I wasn't objecting to the access. I was just thinking if it's going to be a fobbed control gate, it's going to cause more trouble than it's worth. I was looking at the operation of the gate rather than that shouldn't be a gate. I think a gate makes common sense. If people don't want to go that way, they won't use it. But if it's useful, then they will.
In actual fact, Councillor Stribley, I think the gate that is being referred to is the one that accesses down onto Hill Lane, the one that Councillor Bartlett was talking about in the earlier part of his comments about why it's there in the first place.
Chairman, if I may.
Yep, please come in.
We could obviously request or require the applicants to provide details of how that gate would be managed in the future. That could be a reasonable way to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I don't actually see any problem with the fob issue. I've got quite a few properties around in and around my ward that have got fob access to it, including ones operated by Pool Housing Partnership. In many cases, the fob access has been put in to enhance security because people have had previously been getting inside the sites and causing problems and so on, and so that works. In some cases, if it's elderly persons' dwellings or something like that, and this goes back to an earlier point, there's often a camera behind that, so if people can't get access or their fob doesn't work, then there's often the ability, although this is places where you've got a warden where you can sort of say, I can't get in, can you let me in? But you can actually make it secure by having that sort of facility in there, even though it's not actually permanently manned. But I do think that there isn't any problem at all with fobs, and I think it would be a much better situation if there are fobs or similar access to the site than it would be if you didn't have these facilities, because you know, I think that enhances the safety, and as I say, it does add the possibility of being able to monitor the little bit of footpath leading up to the gate. So I think that is actually an essential part of the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to go back, I think it seems people have forgotten what I said earlier on. I mean, what I was suggesting is that there would be no access there. If there were no access, you wouldn't be talking about CCTV cameras, you wouldn't be talking about lost fobs. And the point I'm making is you don't actually need a gate, because you can access all those things that the highway department say you need just by going out of the main exit and going through onto Western Avenue, down through Leedham Avenue. Leedham Road, sorry. So that's what I'm saying, you don't need it, and by not providing the access there, it protects the character of the area for existing residents in Hillview Road, and that's the key point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. So going back, we have no further people indicating to speak at this moment in time. So, Councillor Lepodovin, you have indicated that you wish to propose this to grant, and Councillor Trent to second that. Is there anything you would like to say before we go to the vote, please, Councillor?
I think the points we've made already are more than enough. As I said before, I welcome this. I think the design is good. I love the fact that it's 100% affordable, and I even more love the fact that it's passive house standards, and that sets an exemplar for the future for developments in this area.
Thank you very much. So with that said, I will go to the vote on this. Again, I will ask you to say whether you are for or against or abstaining from the application or vote. I will start off with Councillor McCormack, Vice Chairman.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
Abstain.
Councillor Bull.
For.
Councillor Davies. Councillor Davies. For. Councillor Decent.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Lepodovin.
For.
Councillor Lawson.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
Abstain.
Councillor Stribley?
4.
Councillor Trent?
4.
And myself, I am 4. Before I ask, or whilst I'm asking Mr. Tyler to tot up the votes, I would like to say that I do tend to agree with Councillor Bartlett on his point about the access. I personally don't see that it is necessary. I did go to the site yesterday and realised just how easy it was to go from one side to the other without having to come down there. And I just would like the applicants to maybe look at that again and discuss this with our highways officers to see if an alternative can be found at some stage. Mr. Tyler, would you like to give me the numbers, please?
Indeed, Chairman, thank you. The total number of votes for the motion is 12. There were no votes against and there were 2 abstentions, so that motion has carried. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Therefore, that application has been granted. Thank you very much to Mr. Raven for your presentation, and thank you for all the people that gave their submissions, including Councillor Edwards. With that being said, that is the end of the meeting, and therefore I call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much to everyone for attending this afternoon. Does anyone...